Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us.
Lower your camera a little bit, Rabbi. We only have your hat.
Yeah, well, I wasn't so very interested in the last discussion. We are sponsored by Shalom Fogel, Nishmas Yaakov Zev Ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas Gad, Yosef Ben Sion Ben Yaakov Zev, by Baruch Ian, Lili Nishmas Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba Esther Bas Getel Avram Ben Shmuel HaKayin, by Yaakov Yekmansky with Akaras HaTov to the Rav and the Zoom family, and Nachas from children and grandchildren, A.B. Spry also from Nachas from children and grandchildren, Ed Salah from London, and Joshua Rosenberg, a virtual Talmud. We also want to learn the Refuah Shalema for Dov ben Pearl, Moshe ben Pasel, Shimon Yehuda ben Gittel,
and Yisrael ben Freda Adasa.
Yisrael ben Freda Adasa.
And also Mother says she showed up at Dr. Lance's wedding.
Should have a Refuah Shalema b'seich Shecher Yisrael. We welcome in the Aguda, let's see, that's Rich Lenner and Ruvain Shanet. I'm assuming that Michal Avram is there also. No? Okay. Yisrael Fisher, Mel Zachter, Menachem Umansky, Saba, Shelley Zeitlin, back from Panama, Irving Fishbaum, and Yitzi Fuchs, Marshall Castle, Chaim Kramer, Yisrael Meir Kaplan, Mark Franco, Rabbi Kranz, Gedalia Engel, Ruvain Pollack, Stephen Holtzman, Shalom Fogel, Berish Gesserman, Nachman Chapler, Abe Arbach, Yitzi Muller, Eli Schutman, Avram Rezepkowitz, David Helfgott on Kol Lushan. So we're still, and Michal Akta has just joined us, we're still trying to determine over here if Marshall sells a house to Mark, whether included in the sale is the rights to build up and build a basement, or is it only included if he says umka veruma? And then if umka veruma is necessary for the air rights and the underground rights, so then in order to include the bar and the dus, the pit and the cisterns, it would have to say even an extra language, as we said yesterday, mitoim ara vadrum rakia. So Amalei Ravina Ravashi, 3 lines from the top of Daf Samach Dal Amud Aleph, Tajma, the Amarei Shlakish, Zoi Soimeres, Hamoicher Bayis L'Chaveira, if Marshall sells a house to Mark, the Amalei, and Marshall says the following qualification, Al Manas Shediyuta El Yoina Shali, that the upper level is mine, in other words, the roof is mine, Diyuta El Yoina Shali, the roof is his. Now, that would be unnecessary, because remember we said, if the roof has a parapet of 10 tefachim, it's not included in the sale. So V'amina L'mai Hilcha, so why does Marshall say the Yitur Lashon, the extra language? Rav Zvid Amar, Rav Zvid says that he's reserving the right to project things from the roof. Shem Ratzal Haitzi Bazizin Maitzi. Rapapa, however, says Shem Ratzal Livnois Aliyah Al Gaba, if he wants to build higher, Baina, he could build. So the Gemara says, but the Isol Kedaitach B'stama Loikani, but if you say that without saying Kavaruma, Mark doesn't get the air rights anyway, so Lamali, then why does he have to say Almanas? Even if he didn't say Almanas, he could build up, because he didn't sell that unless he said Kavaruma. Says the Gemara, you're right. Marshall would be able to build up, but the reason why he says Al Menashid Yuta El Yoina Shali is that if the roof caves in, he's stipulating that he has the right to rebuild the roof, and that he wouldn't have otherwise. Ahani le'almanas di nafel. If the roof caves in, hadi banila, he could rebuild it. Now the next Mishnah continues along the theme. Lo yesabar v'lo yesadus, that when he sells the house to Mark doesn't get the well and the cistern, as we welcome in Mo Kushner joining us, we welcome in Dr. Black joining us, both Mo and Dr. Black. You're just in time for the new Mishnah on Daf Samach Dalit, Soyid Hashem Li'Reyav. Lo Yesabar v'lo Yesadus. If Marshall sells a house to Mark, Mark doesn't acquire the well, the cistern, afal pisha kasav like umkavaruma, even though he says that he's selling him to the depths and to the heights. V'tzarech likach loiderech. However, Marshall, who sold the property to Mark, if he wants to get to his well and to his cistern, he has to buy the right of way from Mark. Divrei Rabbi Kiva. That's the reason of Rabbi Kiva. Now, we're going to see that all the way in the Maskana of the Gemara is going to debate this, but all the way in the Maskana of the Gemara is going to say this is because Rabbi Kiva holds Moicher ba'ayin yafa Moicher. The Moicher sells generously. And therefore, since he sold it generously, he sold everything along with all of the land. So he didn't reserve for himself any right of way. So he has to buy it from Mark. The Chacham say, he doesn't have to buy it from him, because Moicher ba'ayin ra Moicher, and therefore when Marshall sold it, he sold it stingily, and he reserved for himself the right of way. Rabbi Akiva, however, admits that in the event that when Marshall sells it, he says a yitur lashon, an extra language. If he says except for the bar and the dus, then he doesn't have to buy from Mark the right away, because as we said, he doesn't have to say chutz from the bar v'dus, because the bar v'dus is not sold with it. So why did he say it? It must be that he's even reserving for himself the right of way. Now here we're going to see that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan are going to be going according to their shita. Machran la'achar. Let's say Marshall just sold to Shelley the bar and the dus. So does Shelley have to buy right of way to get to it? Rabbi Akiva Aimer ain't a tzarich likach loiderech. Shelley doesn't have to buy the right of way. Again, this is consistent because Rabbi Akiva holds Moicher ba'ayin yafa Moicher. The seller sells generously, so when Marshall sold him the bar and the dus, he sold him the right of way as well. The Chacham Aimer tzarich likach loiderech. He does have to buy the right of way because he holds that Moicher ba'ayin ra Moicher. Now, first, we want to know what's the difference between a bar and a dus. Yasser Ravina v'Karkashalei hainu bar hainu dus. Isn't the bar and the dus the same thing? So Amalei Ravatay Sval Ravina Tashma Tanya Echad Bar ve'Echad Adus bekarka. Both a well and a cistern is in the ground. El shabar b'chafira. The bar is only a hole in the ground. You dig in the ground, and that makes a bar. V'adus b'binyan. A dus is something that is lined with brick. So it's a more developed underground structure. Yosef Rabbi Ashi v'Kakashale, indeed, same thing. Rav Ashi was sitting, and he had a difficult hainu bar hainu dus. Amalei Mar Kashisha b'rei Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. So Mar Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi, Tashma, the Tanya Echad Abar ve'Echad Adus bekarka. Both a pit and the dus is in the ground. El shabar b'chafira, the pit is dug in the ground, v'adus bebinyan, and the dus is lined with bricks. Okay, welcome in, and we welcome in Richard Rosenzweig joining us on Facebook, and it's wonderful to have everybody joining us tonight. We did the Mishnah Yomis already earlier today, so right after the share, we're going to go straight into a very interesting Chumash share, a very important Chumash share, I might say, because it's entering, as we enter into the portals of Elul and Bench Reish Chodesh this Shabbos, Bench Reish Chodesh Elul. Now, V'tzarech likach lo derech, we said that when Marshall sells a house to Mark, he reserves from himself, he keeps for himself the bar and the dus, but if he wants to get to it, he's going to have to buy the right of way from Mark, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. The Chacham say that he doesn't have to buy from him. So my lav, says the Gemara, B'hakam Ifli, which the Gemara is going to debate this, it will be the maskana of the Gemara. My lav, B'hakam Ifli, the Rabbi Akiva sav a meicher ba'ayin yafa meicher. When Marshall sold the house to Mark, he sold it generously. He sold him everything. He didn't reserve for himself the right of way. Rabbanan Savrei, Rabbanan knowing Marshall, Rabbanan Savrei meicher ba'ayin ra meicher. That when Marshall sells, he sells stingily, and therefore he certainly reserved for himself the right to get to his own bar and dus. Or the kamer nami ba'alma, and that which we say all over Shas. Rabbi Kiva l'tamei, the amar meicher ba'ayin yafa meicher, the source is me'acha. The source is from our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, well, maybe something else is going on over here. Mimai, who says? Dilma Rabbi Akiva Sava, Rabbi Akiva says, Ein Adam Roitze Sheyitain Ma'osav V'Yidresu Acherim. Maybe the reason for Rabbi Akiva is Mark is not paying good money to have Marshall trample through his property. And that's why Rabbi Akiva holds that if Marshall wants it, he's going to have to buy the right of way. The Rabbanan Savrei, while the Rabbanan hold, Ein Adam Reitz Shiyito Mais, even though Marshall is getting money, but he doesn't want to have to fly in the air, since he knows he's keeping the bar and the dus for himself, he obviously wants to have a way to get there. A person is not going to take money and be Yifrach Ba'aver and have to fly in the air. So Marshall definitely wanted to keep the right of way for himself. So therefore we don't know if they're arguing about Meicher Ba'ayin Yafa Meicher or Meicher Ba'ayin Ram Meicher, as we welcome in Jay Siegel. Glad to have you back, Jay. Welcome in Avram Sheps. And if you're just joining us now, we are on the first wide line on Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis. First wide line on Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis. The Ella Miseifa, the Raya is from the Seifa. Remember, we're trying to prove that Rabbi Kiva holds Meicher Ba'ayin Yafa Meicher, and Rabban hold Meicher Ba'ayin Ra Meicher. Ella Miseifa, Mochran La'achar. If Marshall sells just the well and the cistern, Rabbi Kiva says, Mark doesn't have to buy the right of way. Which sounds like why? Because Meicher Ba'ayin Yafa Meicher. Marshall sold it to him generously. And therefore when he sold it to him, he also gave him the right of way. The Chacham Ma'im Tzarech. Says the Gemara, well, maybe there's another element involved. And that is the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan is whether we go in a sale according to the mindset of the buyer or the mindset of the seller. The buyer obviously wants the right of way. The seller, he wants to sell as little as possible. So the Gemara says, again, maybe Dilma B'hai Pligi. Rabbi Kiva says we go according to the mindset of the buyer, and of course Mark wants to get the right of way. Over Rabbanan Sabri Basadaita Meicher Aslin. We go after the seller. The Ella says to Gemara, this that we say to Rabbi Kiva holds Meicher ba'ayin Yafer Meicher, and Rabbanan hold Meicher ba'ayin Ra Meicher, is from another Mishnah. The Ella Maha. Here, Marshall sells a field to Mark. The Ella Maha. If Marshall sells a field to Mark, lo yasabar, Mark doesn't get the well, v'lo yasagas, he doesn't get the press, the olive press, v'lo yasashayvich, he doesn't get the dovecotes. Bein charuvim, whether they are in ruins, bein yeshuvim, whether they are usable. However, if Marshall kept the rights to the dovecote, to the press, to the well, but he has to buy the right of way from Mark, who he sold the field to. Now, why does it have to teach? It already teaches the machlokes about. It already teaches the machlokes about the bias. Why does it have to teach it again by a field? Hasulamali must be that this is coming to prove that he sells it liberally, so that when he sells it to Mark, and even though he reserved for himself the dovecote, but he sold him everything, even the right of way, and therefore if he wants it, he's going to have to buy it from him. Says, no, who says? Maybe it just happens to be that they have to teach the machlokes both by a house and by a field. It has to teach us the machlokes by a house and also by a field. Both are necessary. By a house, there's a strong reason to say that if Marshall wants right of way, he's going to have to buy it. Mishum debayitz niyusa, because in a house, Mark wants privacy. Aval sada, but in a field you don't need privacy. So there maybe Marshall doesn't have to buy the rights of the right of way. Malay. On the other hand, v'yash minan sada, there is where Marshall has to buy the rights of a right of way, because Mark doesn't want anybody traipsing through his field and damaging the crops. Mishum dekoshelei davsha. It's not good, the walking on the field. Aval bias, where there's no harm to walking, malay, maybe he doesn't have to buy it. Ella, finally the Gemara is going to have a proof that Rabbi Akiva holds Meicher ba'ayin Yafer Meicher and Rabbanan hold Meicher ba'ayin Ra Meicher. That is Ella Miseifa Bachron la'achar. If Ella Miseifa Machron la'achar, in the event that Elam Seifa, Machran La'achar, if in the event that Marshall sold the dovecote to Mark, sold the press to Mark, Rabbi Kiva Amarein Tzarich Likach Loidech. Rabbi Kiva says he doesn't have to buy the right of way. Why? Because when Marshall sold it to him, he sold it to him generously, so he gave him the right of way too. The Chacham Amarein Tzarich, he does have to buy. Why? Because Meicher ba'ayin Ra Meicher. Again, Hasulamali. Why did they have to teach this again? Hainohach. Elalav Hakamash Malan. It must be the Rabbi Kiva Savar Meicher ba'ayin Yafa Meicher. that the seller sells generously. And in all these cases, since the seller sells generously, whether it was Marshall who sold the house to Mark and reserved the bar v'dus, but he sold it generously, and therefore if he wants to get into his bar and dus, he's going to have to buy from the right of way. Or if it's in the case where Marshall sold to Mark the bar v'dus, Mark does not have to buy from him the right of way because Meicher is buying Yafa Meicher. While Rabbanan say Meicher buying Ra Meicher, the seller sells stingily. So if Mark sold the house to Marshall and he kept for himself the bar v'dus, he doesn't have to buy the right of way from him because he reserved his right of way because he sells it stingily. And if Marshall sold to Mark the bar and the dus, Mark would have to buy from him the right of way because when Marshall sold it to him, he sold it to him stingily. Shma mina, that is indeed a good proof, and this is the source of all over Shas. The Rabbi Kiva holds Meicher b'ayin Yafa Meicher, and the Rabbanan hold Meicher b'ayin Ra Meicher. Okay, now Rabbi said I did the Mishnah Yomis already, so now we're going to go straight into a very important Chumashir.